I never thought I'd be telling this story to strangers on the internet, but here I am. My name is Catherine, and I'm 42 years old. For 20 years of my life, I was married to a man I thought was my soulmate, my rock, my everything. We have 2 beautiful children together, Jackson, who's 18 and just started college, and Lily, who's 15 and the spitting image of me at her age, though she'd hate to admit it. Before I dive into how everything fell apart, I should probably tell you about the life we built together. I met Richard when I was 21, working my way through college as a waitress at this little Italian restaurant downtown. He was 25, ambitious, and already climbing the corporate ladder at a financial firm. He had these intense blue eyes that seemed to look right through me, and a smile that made my heart skip a beat every single time. We got married after dating for just a year. Everyone said we were rushing, but when you know, right? Well, that's what I thought anyway. From the beginning, I put Richard's career first. When he was offered a promotion that required us to move across the country, away from my family and the final year of my degree program, I didn't hesitate. "We'll build something amazing together," he promised as we packed up our tiny apartment. I believed him with every fiber of my being. I finished my degree online while pregnant with Jackson, throwing up between study sessions and final exams. Richard was traveling more and more for work, but I told myself this was temporary, that we were investing in our future. When Jackson was born, Richard was in Singapore closing a deal. My mother had to fly in to be with me in the delivery room. Richard made it back 3 days later, exhausted but proud, bringing a tiny designer suit for our newborn son and a diamond bracelet for me. "This is what it's all for," he said, gesturing to the gifts. "So we can give our family everything." But what our family really needed was him, present and accounted for. Still, I smiled and thanked him, pushing down the ache in my chest. When I got pregnant with Lily 3 years later, I was working part-time as a marketing coordinator. I loved my job, but Richard thought it would be better for our family if I stayed home full-time. "The kids need stability," he said. "And with my schedule, someone needs to be the constant." So I quit. Another sacrifice on the altar of our marriage, our family. The years blurred together in a haze of school drop-offs, soccer practices, dance recitals, and dinner parties with Richard's colleagues where I played the perfect corporate wife. I became an expert at applying makeup that hid the dark circles under my eyes, at laughing at jokes that weren't funny, at making small talk with people who never remembered my name from one meeting to the next. All while Richard climbed higher and higher in his company, eventually becoming chief operating officer. Our house grew bigger, our vacations more extravagant, our children's private school tuitions more expensive. From the outside, we were living the American dream. But inside, I was disappearing. I can pinpoint the exact moment I realized something was wrong. It was our anniversary, 19 years together. I had planned a special dinner at home after the kids went to their grandparents for the weekend. I spent hours cooking Richard's favorite meal, bought a new dress that made me feel beautiful for the first time in months, even splurged on fancy candles that smelled like the beach where we'd had our honeymoon. Richard walked in 2 hours late, barely glancing at the cold food or my carefully applied makeup. "Sorry, emergency at work," he muttered, loosening his tie and reaching for the whiskey. No kiss hello. No acknowledgement of the occasion. "It's our anniversary," I said, my voice smaller than I wanted it to be. He looked up then, surprise flickering across his face before being replaced with something else. Something that looked almost like irritation. "Right," he said. "Sorry. It's been a crazy day. Can we maybe do this another time? I have emails I need to handle before tomorrow." I remember standing in our massive kitchen, surrounded by all the trappings of success, feeling completely alone. But still I nodded. Still I wrapped up his dinner and put it in the refrigerator. Still I blew out the candles and washed the dishes and went to bed alone. That should have been my wake-up call. But when you've spent half your life building something, you don't walk away at the first sign of cracks in the foundation. Or the second. Or even the 20th. The real breakdown started about a year ago, when Richard's company merged with a competitor. Suddenly, his already demanding job became all-consuming. He was stressed all the time, snapping at me over the smallest things. The few times he was home for dinner, he was on his phone or laptop. When I tried to talk to him about it, he'd dismiss me. "You don't understand the pressure I'm under," he'd say. "I'm keeping this whole family afloat. All you have to do is take care of the house." All I had to do, As if raising our children, managing our home, coordinating our social calendar, and being constantly available for his needs was nothing. As if the degrees I'd put on hold and the career I'd abandoned weren't sacrifices that deserved recognition. Around this time I started having trouble sleeping. I'd lie awake next to Richard's empty side of the bed. He was working late more and more often, and stare at the ceiling, wondering how we'd gotten here. Wondering if this hollow feeling in my chest would ever go away. Then came the text message that changed everything. It was a Thursday afternoon. I was at the store buying ingredients for Jackson's favorite lasagna. He was coming home from college that weekend and I wanted everything to be perfect. My phone pinged with a message from Richard. But it wasn't meant for me. Can't wait to see you tonight. Told the wife I have a business dinner. Wear that thing I like. My hand started shaking so badly I dropped a jar of pasta sauce. It shattered on the floor. Red spreading across the white tiles like blood. A store employee rushed over asking if I was okay, but all I could do was stare at my phone. At those words that confirmed what some part of me had suspected for months. Richard was cheating on me. I somehow made it home, though I don't remember the drive. I sat in our driveway for what felt like hours trying to figure out what to do. Confront him? Pretend I hadn't seen it? Leave? Where would I go? What would I tell the kids? In the end, I did none of those things. I went inside, made dinner like everything was normal and waited. Richard texted at 8 p.m. saying he'd be stuck at the office all night. I replied with a simple okay, and then turned off my phone. Over the next few weeks, I became a detective in my own marriage. I didn't confront Richard immediately because I needed to know the full extent of his betrayal. How long had this been going on? Who was she? Was it serious or just sex? I checked his credit card statements. There were charges for hotel rooms, expensive restaurants I'd never been to, a jewelry store where he'd spent more on one purchase than our monthly grocery budget. I found a second phone hidden in his golf bag. I hired a private investigator who took photos of Richard and his mistress, his 29-year-old executive assistant, Natalie. The same assistant who'd sent me flowers from Richard on my birthday, which he'd forgotten. The same assistant who'd helped me plan his surprise 40th birthday party 2 years ago. The evidence mounted, undeniable and devastating. But still I said nothing. I was gathering my strength making plans. Because after 20 years of putting Richard first, I finally understood that I needed to put myself first now. The confrontation, when it finally happened, was both better and worse than I'd imagined. It was a Tuesday night and miracle of miracles, Richard was home for dinner. The kids were both out, Jackson back at college, Lily at a friend's house for a study group. I'd made Richard's favorite meal again, not out of love this time but as a strategic choice. I wanted him comfortable, unsuspecting. "This is nice," he said between bites, actually looking at me for the first time in weeks. "We should do this more often." I took a sip of my wine, examining the man across from me. The man I'd built my life around. The man who'd been lying to my face for, well, I still wasn't sure exactly how long. "Yes," I said. "We should. But it's hard when you're so busy with work." "And Natalie." The fork halfway to his mouth stilled. His eyes, those blue eyes I'd once found so captivating, widened slightly before narrowing. "What are you talking about?" His voice was steady, but a muscle in his jaw twitched. A tell I'd learned to recognize over 2 decades of marriage. "I know, Richard. About the affair. About the hotel rooms and the gifts and the lies. I've known for weeks." He put his fork down with deliberate slowness. "You're being ridiculous." "Am I?" I reached for my phone, pulled up the text message he'd accidentally sent me, the one I'd screenshot before he could unsend it, and turned it toward him. "Is this ridiculous?" The color drained from his face as he read his own words. Then, like a chameleon changing colors, his expression shifted from shock to anger. "So you've been spying on me? Going through my phone? Is that the kind of relationship we have now?" I almost laughed at the absurdity of his response. That was what he was upset about? "The kind of relationship we have," I said, my voice surprisingly steady, "is one where you're sleeping with your assistant and lying to me about it, where you've been emotionally absent for years, where I've given up everything for you, and you've given me nothing but scraps of your attention in return." He pushed back from the table, the legs of his chair screeching against the hardwood floor. "Nothing? I've given you nothing." His voice rose with each word. Who pays for this house? Who pays for the kids' schools? Who makes sure you can get your hair done? And buy whatever the hell you want whenever you want it? Money, I said quietly. You've given me money, Richard. But not respect. Not honesty. Not partnership. Oh, here we go. He threw his napkin onto his half-eaten dinner. Poor Catherine, trapped in her mansion with her credit cards. What a tragic life you lead. The condescension in his voice made something snap inside me. 20 years of swallowed words came rushing to the surface. Yes, poor me, I shot back. Poor me who gave up my career to raise your children while you were off building your empire and screwing your assistant. Poor me who moved across the country away from everyone I knew because you needed to take that job. Poor me who has spent the last 20 years of my life supporting you, believing in you, loving you while you've been lying to my face. I was standing now too, my whole body trembling with a rage so pure it felt cleansing. Richard's face contorted with a fury that matched my own. You want to know the truth? Fine. Yes, I'm sleeping with Natalie. Have been for over a year. And you know why? Because she makes me feel alive. She supports my ambitions instead of making me feel guilty for working hard. She doesn't sigh and roll her eyes when I have to cancel plans. She understands what it takes to succeed. Each word was a knife, but I stood my ground. And what exactly have I been doing for 20 years if not supporting you? I gave up everything for you. That's the problem, he shouted. I never asked you to give up everything. That was your choice. And now you resent me for it. And you're suffocating me with your neediness and your expectations. Do you have any idea what it's like to come home to your disappointed face day after day? You're ruining my life, Catherine. You've been ruining it for years. The silence that followed his outburst was deafening. I stared at this stranger wearing my husband's face, this man who had just rewritten our entire history to cast himself as the victim. If that's how you truly feel, I said finally, my voice barely above a whisper, then you should go. He blinked, clearly not expecting this response. What? Go. To Natalie. To a hotel. Wherever. But not here. Not tonight. For a moment, he looked uncertain, as if he hadn't expected me to actually stand up for myself. Then his expression hardened again. Fine, he spat. I will. And you know what? It's a relief. Do you have any idea how exhausting it is pretending to be happy in this marriage? I watched in stunned silence as he stormed upstairs. 20 minutes later, he came back down with a hastily packed suitcase. He didn't look at me as he headed for the door. Tell the kids whatever you want, he threw over his shoulder. But make no mistake, I'll be back for what's mine. Half of everything, Catherine. Remember that. The door slammed behind him, rattling the framed family photos on the wall. One of them, our wedding picture, fell and shattered on the floor. I should have felt devastated. I should have collapsed in tears. But standing there, surrounded by the broken glass of our marriage, all I felt was a strange, calm clarity. Because Richard didn't know what I knew. He didn't know about the meetings I'd been having with a divorce attorney for the past 3 weeks. He didn't know that I'd already documented every aspect of his affair, every questionable financial decision, every late night at the office that was actually spent in a hotel with Natalie. He didn't know that I'd been quietly preparing for war. And he certainly didn't know about the inheritance I'd received from my grandmother 6 months ago. Money I hadn't told him about because something in my gut told me I might need an escape route someday. Money that had allowed me to secure my own legal representation, one of the best divorce attorneys in the state. I picked up the pieces of our broken wedding photo, carefully placing the shattered glass in the trash. As I looked at our younger selves, me in white beaming with hope, Richard smiling his charming smile, I felt a pang of sadness for that girl. She had no idea what was coming. But I wasn't that girl anymore. The next morning I called the locksmith to change the locks. Then I called my attorney. He left, I said. And he's threatening to take half of everything. Let him try, my attorney replied. We're ready. The 2 weeks after Richard walked out were a blur of legal meetings, tearful conversations with our children, and sleepless nights. Lily was devastated, alternating between crying and raging at her father when he tried to call her. Jackson, more mature but no less hurt, handled it with a quiet anger that broke my heart. Did you know? I asked my son during one of our late-night talks. About your dad's situation? Jackson's jaw tightened in a way that reminded me so much of his father. I had suspicions, he admitted. Last time I was home, I saw him texting someone at dinner. He was smiling at his phone in a way he hasn't smiled at you in a long time. The observation from my teenage son cut deep. Had everyone seen what was happening except me? Richard, meanwhile, was staying at Natalie's apartment. He'd called several times, his tone vacillating between threatening and conciliatory. He'd get half the house, half my retirement account, half of everything we'd built together. That was fair, he insisted. When I didn't engage with his threats, he tried a different approach. Maybe we've been hasty, he said in a voicemail 3 days after leaving. We have 20 years together, Kat. That's not something to throw away over one mistake. One mistake. As if a year-long affair could be classified as a single error in judgment. I didn't call him back. 13 days after our confrontation, Richard texted that he was coming by the house to discuss the division of assets. I consulted with my attorney, who advised me to record the conversation. California is a 2-party consent state for recordings, so I would have to inform Richard he was being recorded, but just having the recorder visible might keep him on better behavior. I prepared for his visit like I was preparing for battle. I dressed carefully in an outfit that made me feel strong. A crisp white button-down, well-fitted jeans, the boots I'd bought myself after getting the inheritance. I wore my grandmother's sapphire earrings, a reminder of the strong woman whose foresight had given me options Richard knew nothing about. When the doorbell rang, he no longer had a key, a fact that had enraged him when he first discovered it. I took a deep breath and opened the door. Richard looked terrible. His normally impeccable appearance was showing signs of strain. His shirt was wrinkled, his face unshaven. But his eyes still held that entitlement, that certainty that somehow this would all work out in his favor. "Catherine," he said, his tone formal as he stepped into the foyer of what had been our home. "You're looking well." "Thank you," I replied coolly. "We can talk in the kitchen." I led him to the kitchen island where I'd set up a small recording device, clearly visible, and a folder containing certain documents my attorney had helped me prepare. Richard's eyes narrowed at the recorder. "What's that for?" "Transparency," I said. "I'm recording our conversation. If you're not comfortable with that, we don't need to talk today." He looked like he wanted to object but thought better of it. "Fine. Whatever. Let's just get this over with." He sat across from me, running a hand through his disheveled hair. "Look, I've been thinking about how to make this as painless as possible. The way I see it, we sell the house, split the proceeds. Same with the investment accounts, retirement funds, everything down the middle. Clean break." I listened silently, noting how he made it sound so reasonable, so fair. As if he hadn't been the one to break our vows. As if we were equal partners who had simply decided to go our separate ways. "I've already talked to a realtor," he continued, gaining confidence from my silence. "The market's good right now. We could list next week and probably have an offer within days." When I still didn't respond, he leaned forward, his tone softening into the persuasive voice he used to close business deals. "Kat, I know you're angry. You have every right to be. What I did was wrong. But we need to be practical here. This house, our assets, they belong to both of us. The law is clear on that." That's when I slid the folder toward him. "Before we discuss selling anything," I said calmly, "you might want to look at these." Richard frowned as he opened the folder. Inside were several documents, neatly organized with color-coded tabs. His frown deepened as he started reading the first page. "What is this?" he asked, confusion clouding his features. "That," I said, my voice steady, "is the deed to our house. If you look closely at the ownership section, you'll notice something interesting." I watched as his eyes scanned the document, his expression shifting from confusion to disbelief. "This can't be right," he muttered. "The house is in your name only? That's impossible. We bought it together." "Actually, we didn't." I leaned forward slightly. 6 years ago, when you were restructuring some investments for tax purposes, you transferred the house solely into my name. Your financial advisor suggested it as an asset protection strategy, remember? You were concerned about potential liability issues with that risky venture your company was undertaking. I could see the memory dawning on him. A decision made during a time when his career seemed invincible, when the thought of our marriage dissolving wasn't even a consideration. That was a temporary measure, he sputtered. For liability purposes only. It doesn't change the fact that we bought this house together, with our joint funds. That brings me to the second document, I said, pointing to the next tab. Our prenuptial agreement. Richard's face paled. The prenup had been his idea, not mine. When we married, he was already on a promising career track while I was still finishing college. His parents, wealthy and cautious, had insisted he protect his future assets. At the time, I'd been too in love to care, signing without much thought. The prenup clearly states that assets held separately remain separate property in the event of a dissolution of marriage, I continued. Including the house, which, as we've just established, is solely in my name. This is absurd, Richard snapped, his voice rising. No judge will uphold this. We've been married for 20 years. I've paid the mortgage, the property taxes, everything. Actually, I said, flipping to the third tab, if you look at these bank statements, you'll see that for the past 6 years, all house-related expenses have been paid from my personal account. The account you helped me set up when you transferred the house to me. For cleaner bookkeeping, as you put it. I watched as he frantically scanned the documents, looking for some loophole, some mistake. Finding none, his face flushed with anger. You planned this, he accused. You've been planning this for years. I shook my head. No, Richard. You planned this. Every decision reflected in these documents was your idea, your strategy. I simply kept the paperwork. He slammed the folder shut. This is manipulation. You tricked me. Like you tricked me? I asked quietly. When you told me you were working late, but you were really with Natalie. When you said you loved me, but you were buying her jewelry. When you stood in our kitchen and told me I was ruining your life, after 20 years of me supporting your every ambition. I took a deep breath. But there's more. Next tab, please. Richard hesitated, then flipped to the fourth section. His eyes widened. Your company's stock options, I explained. Granted to you as part of your compensation package over the years. According to our prenup, employment benefits acquired during the marriage would typically be considered joint property. A small bitter smile crossed his face. Exactly. Which means, I interrupted, that I would normally be entitled to half of their value. Except for these. I pointed to the specific clause my attorney had highlighted. These particular options were granted under your company's key executive incentive plan. A plan that, according to your own employment contract, explicitly classifies these grants as separate property, not subject to division in divorce proceedings. I'll never forget the look on Richard's face in that moment, the slow dawning realization that his own careful financial planning, his own insistence on protecting his assets, had now turned against him. There must be some mistake, he said, but his voice lacked conviction. Richard was many things, but financially stupid wasn't one of them. He knew what he was looking at. No mistake, I assured him. My attorney has been very thorough. The house is mine. And while I am entitled to a portion of our joint savings and investments, your most valuable assets, this house and your stock options, are protected from division. By your own design. Richard stared at me, speechless for perhaps the first time since I'd known him. Then his expression hardened. Your attorney, he repeated. So you've lawyered up behind my back. How long have you been planning this ambush? Since I found out about Natalie, I said simply. Though to be fair, I've been keeping all our financial records organized since the day we got married. My father taught me that much at least. Richard stood abruptly, pushing away from the counter. This isn't over, Catherine. My lawyers will tear these documents apart. They can try, I replied calmly. But everything here is legal, signed by you, notarized when necessary. You're welcome to get a second opinion, of course. He paced the kitchen, running his hands through his hair in frustration. I remained seated, watching him. The power dynamic between us had shifted so dramatically in the span of 15 minutes that I almost felt dizzy with it. What do you want? He finally asked. Money? Is that it? Name your price. I considered his question carefully. What did I want? Revenge? Compensation for years of emotional neglect? An apology he clearly wasn't capable of giving sincerely? I want what's legally mine, I said after a moment. And I want you to leave me and our children in peace. He laughed, a harsh sound without humor. The children? They're adults, Catherine. You think you can turn them against me? I haven't had to, I replied. Your actions have done that all on their own. But they love you, Richard. They're hurt and angry right now, but they love you. Don't make this any harder on them than it already is. Something flickered in his eyes then. A brief glimpse of the man I'd once loved, the father who had, despite his many failings, adored his children. This isn't fair, he said, but the fight was leaving his voice. No, I agreed. Very little about this situation is fair. But it is what it is. Richard gathered the documents back into the folder and tucked it under his arm. I'm taking these to my attorney. Of course. I have copies. He moved toward the door, then stopped and turned back to face me. For a moment I thought he might apologize, might acknowledge the pain he'd caused. Instead he simply said, I never thought you'd be this calculating. The words were meant to wound, to cast me as the villain in our story. But after decades of putting everyone else first, him, the children, his career, his needs, I found I didn't mind being seen as calculating for once. I learned from the best, I replied. After he left, I sat in the kitchen for a long time, letting the reality of what had just happened sink in. I'd stood up to Richard. I'd outmaneuvered him at his own game. And I'd done it without stooping to his level of deception. The sense of empowerment was intoxicating and terrifying. For so many years, I'd defined myself as Richard's wife, Jackson and Lily's mother. But who was I now? What did Catherine, just Catherine, want from the rest of her life? I didn't have all the answers yet, but for the first time in years I was excited to find out. The next few months were a whirlwind of legal proceedings, emotional conversations, and personal reckonings. As I had expected, Richard did consult with several attorneys, all of whom confirmed what my lawyer had already told me. The house was legally mine, as were his stock options legally his. Our joint accounts would be divided equally. But those two major assets remained separate property. It was a devastating financial blow for him, one that his ego struggled to absorb. The house alone was worth over $2 million in our upscale neighborhood. And while he still had his considerable income and his stock options, he had lost the home he'd thought would be part of his settlement. Natalie, as it turned out, was less interested in Richard once he wasn't quite the financial catch he'd appeared to be. 3 months into their official relationship, she accepted a job offer at a competing firm in another state. Richard found out she'd been interviewing there since the week after he moved in with her. She said she needed to prioritize her career. He told me during one of our more civil discussions about the kids' college funds. The irony wasn't lost on either of us. Our divorce was finalized 6 months after that night he walked out. The terms were largely what my attorney had outlined from the beginning. I kept the house and my inheritance. Richard kept his stock options and retirement accounts. Our joint savings were divided equally, and we both agreed to continue supporting Jackson's and Lily's education. The legal resolution was clean, but the emotional aftermath was messy. Lily refused to speak to her father for weeks after learning about his affair. When she finally agreed to see him, their lunch ended with her storming out of the restaurant after he suggested she try to understand how complicated adult relationships can be. He treated me like I'm some stupid child, she raged when she got home, tears streaming down her face. Like I couldn't possibly understand what it means to make a promise and keep it. I held her while she cried, careful not to say anything that would further damage her relationship with Richard. Despite everything, he was still her father, and I knew she needed him in her life, even if it would take time for them to rebuild their bond. Jackson handled things differently. Always the peacemaker, he maintained contact with his father but made his disappointment clear. I just want to understand why, he told me one night during a visit home from college. Was he unhappy for a long time? Did he just stop loving us? Your father loves you and Lily very much, I assured him. His choices were about him, not about either of you. And not even really about me if I'm being honest. I think Richard was running from parts of himself he didn't want to face. It was the most generous interpretation I could offer, and I meant it. The anger I had felt toward Richard had gradually transformed into something like pity. He had everything a person could want. A loving family, a successful career, financial security, and he'd thrown it away for an affair that hadn't even lasted. As for me, I was discovering that life after Richard held possibilities I had never imagined. 3 months after our divorce was finalized, I enrolled in a master's program in marketing, finishing the advanced degree I had put on hold when we moved for Richard's job all those years ago. At 42, I was by far the oldest student in most of my classes, but I found I didn't mind. My life experience gave me insights my younger classmates lacked, and my determination to succeed surprised even me. I also started dating again, tentatively at first. Coffee here, a dinner there. Nothing serious, but enough to remind me that I was still young, still desirable, still capable of feeling those butterflies of attraction and possibility. 1 year to the day after Richard had walked out, claiming I was ruining his life, I stood in the kitchen of my house, hosting a dinner party. Around the table sat my closest friends, the ones who had supported me through the darkest days of my divorce. Jackson was home from college for the weekend, and Lily had helped me cook, showing off the culinary skills she'd been honing in her home economics class. "A toast," said my friend Diane, raising her glass, "to Catherine, who showed us all what courage looks like." Everyone raised their glasses, and I felt a flush of embarrassment mixed with pride. "I didn't do anything special," I protested. "I just stopped accepting less than I deserved." "That's the definition of courage for a lot of women," Diane replied. "And you did it with grace." Later that night, after the guests had gone and the kids had retreated to their rooms, I sat on my back porch, wrapped in a soft blanket against the evening chill. From inside came the faint sounds of Lily's music and Jackson's laughter, as he video chatted with friends from school. Normal, everyday sounds that now filled me with gratitude, rather than the restless dissatisfaction I'd felt for so many years of my marriage. My phone buzzed with a text message. It was from Richard. "1 year today. Been doing a lot of thinking. I'm sorry for what I said that night. You never ruined my life. I ruined ours. If you're willing, I'd like to talk sometime." "Just talk." I stared at the message for a long time, watching the cursor blink as I considered my response. Part of me, a small vindictive part, wanted to ignore it, to let him feel what it was like to be dismissed and ignored. But that wasn't who I wanted to be. "I appreciate that, Richard. I hope you're doing well. Maybe in time we can work toward a friendship, for the kids' sake. But I'm not ready for that conversation yet." I sent the text and put my phone away, turning my attention back to the night sky. The stars were particularly bright, or maybe I was just finally taking the time to notice them. 6 months later, I graduated with my master's degree. Jackson and Lily sat in the audience, cheering embarrassingly loudly when my name was called. To my surprise, Richard was there too, sitting a respectful distance from our children but present nonetheless. He'd asked permission to attend, and I'd said yes. After the ceremony, he approached me with a gift bag. "Congratulations," he said, his smile tentative but genuine. "This is really impressive, Kat. I mean it." I accepted the bag and peered inside. It contained a beautiful leather portfolio embossed with my new credentials. "For job interviews," he explained. "Though I hear you've already had a few offers." News traveled fast in our social circle. I had indeed received 2 job offers, one from a promising startup and another from an established firm. "Thank you," I said. "It's very thoughtful." An awkward silence fell between us. 22 years of history compressed into a moment. "I'm seeing someone," he finally said. "I thought you should hear it from me before the kids mention it." "Is it serious?" I asked, surprised by my lack of jealousy. "It's healthy," he replied. "She's my age. A widow. We're taking things slowly." I nodded. "I'm glad, Richard." And I was. Not because I harbored any lingering romantic feelings for him, but because his relationship with our children would be easier if he found stability and happiness. "And you?" he asked. "Are you seeing anyone?" I thought of Alex, the literature professor I'd been dating for the past 2 months. Thoughtful, kind Alex who listened when I spoke and remembered little details about my day. Who had flowers delivered to me the morning of my graduation with a card that read, *, "Proud of you" doesn't begin to cover it. *. "I am," I said simply, not *elaborating. Some parts of my life weren't Richard's business anymore. He nodded, accepting the boundary. "You look happy, Kat. It suits you." As he walked away, I felt a weight lift that I hadn't even realized I was still carrying. Not forgiveness exactly, what Richard had done had caused too much pain for simple forgiveness. But acceptance, perhaps. An acknowledgement that our story together had ended. But my own story was still being written. 2 years after the night Richard walked out, I sat in my office at the marketing firm that had hired me post-graduation. I'd just been promoted to senior marketing strategist, with a team of 3 reporting to me. On my desk sat a framed photo of Jackson in his graduation cap and gown, another of Lily at her high school prom, and a small potted succulent that Alex had given me when I first got the job. My phone rang, Lily calling from college. "Mom!" she exclaimed when I answered. "I got it. The summer internship in New York." I felt my heart swell with pride. "That's amazing, sweetheart. I knew you could do it. It's going to look so good on my resume, and the connections I'll make." She chattered on excitedly about her plans, her future, her dreams. As I listened, I marveled at the confident young woman my daughter had become, so different from the tentative, people-pleasing girl I had been at her age. Somehow, in the midst of all the pain and disruption of the divorce, she had learned a crucial lesson. Her worth wasn't tied to anyone else's approval. She knew her value and wasn't afraid to claim it. Perhaps, in the end, that was the unexpected gift that had emerged from the wreckage of my marriage. By standing up for myself, by refusing to accept less than I deserved, I had shown my children what self-respect looked like in action. "Mom!" Lily's voice pulled me back to the present. "Are you still there?" "I'm here," I said. "Just proud of you, that's all." "I learned from the best," she replied, unknowingly echoing the words I had said to Richard that day in the kitchen when everything changed. But this time the words weren't tinged with bitterness. They were a recognition of strength passed from mother to daughter. A legacy more valuable than any house or financial settlement could ever be. After we hung up, I opened my desk drawer and pulled out a small journal I had started the day after Richard left. On the first page, in handwriting shaky with fear and anger, I had written, "Who am I without him?" 2 years and countless entries later, I finally had my answer. I was Catherine. Mother. Marketing strategist. Graduate. Friend. Girlfriend. Homeowner. I was the woman who had stood in her kitchen and said, "Enough." I was the woman who had chosen herself. I closed the journal and placed it back in the drawer. Then I turned to my computer to finish the presentation I was working on, a smile playing at the corners of my lips. Richard had been wrong about many things, but his biggest mistake was telling me I was ruining his life. Because in that moment he gave me permission to start rebuilding mine. And what a beautiful life it was turning out to be. 3 years later, the morning sun streamed through the kitchen windows as I sipped my coffee, scrolling through work emails on my tablet. The house was quiet. Jackson had his own apartment now, and Lily was studying abroad for the semester. But the silence no longer felt empty. It felt peaceful. The doorbell rang and I glanced at the clock, surprised. It was barely 8 a.m. on a Saturday. I wasn't expecting anyone. When I opened the door, I found Richard standing on my porch, looking uncomfortable. "Richard? Is everything okay?" We had established a civil relationship over the years, but unexpected visits weren't part of our new normal. "Sorry to drop by unannounced," he said. I need some advice." I hesitated, then stepped aside to let him in. We sat at the kitchen island, the same spot where, 3 years earlier, I had presented him with the documents that had changed everything. Richard looked older, the lines around his eyes deeper, his hair more gray than brown now. His relationship with the widow hadn't lasted, but he'd recently started seeing someone new. A doctor he'd met when he'd taken Lily to the emergency room after a minor car accident last year. "Charlotte asked me to move in with her," he said without preamble. "And," I prompted when he didn't continue, "and I'm terrified." He laughed, a self-deprecating sound. "After what happened with us with Natalie, I don't trust myself, Kat. I don't trust that I won't mess this up too." I considered his words carefully. Once I would have rushed to reassure him to take responsibility for his emotional well-being. But that wasn't my job anymore. "Why are you telling me this, Richard?" He looked surprised by the question. "Because you know me better than anyone. Because despite everything, you've always been honest with me. Even when it hurt." I nodded, acknowledging the truth in his statement. Then I'll be honest now. Yes, you could mess it up. You could repeat the same patterns that destroyed our marriage. Or you could choose differently. How? The single word contained years of regret. By remembering what matters. By being present. Not just physically but emotionally. By recognizing when you're using work to avoid intimacy. I paused. By understanding that love isn't just a feeling. It's a daily choice. Richard absorbed my words in silence, his gaze fixed on his hands. I didn't appreciate what we had, he finally said. I didn't appreciate you. No, I agreed. You didn't. I'm sorry, Catherine. Truly. The apology hung in the air between us, sincere but also irrelevant to our current lives. We had both moved on. I was engaged to Alex now, planning a small wedding for the following spring. Richard was trying to build something new with Charlotte. If you're looking for my forgiveness, you have it, I said. But if you're looking for absolution, that has to come from within you. He nodded, acknowledging the truth in my words. You're doing well? You're happy. I am. And it wasn't a lie or an exaggeration. I had built a life I loved, a fulfilling career, a loving relationship, strong bonds with my children, a circle of true friends. Are you? Getting there, he said. Charlotte is. She challenges me. Doesn't let me hide behind work or excuses. It's uncomfortable sometimes. Growth usually is. We talked a while longer about the kids, about his new role at his company, about the marketing campaign my team had just launched. Ordinary conversation between two people with a shared history but separate futures. As he was leaving, Richard paused at the door. You know, that night when I said you were ruining my life and walked out? It was the best thing that ever happened to you. I laughed, surprised by his insight. It was, wasn't it? And the worst thing that ever happened to me, he added ruefully. I had everything, and I didn't even know it. After he left, I called Alex, who was at his campus office grading papers. Richard just stopped by, I told him. Everything okay? Alex asked, concern in his voice. Yes, I said. Everything is exactly as it should be. And it was. Not perfect. Not without challenges or occasional doubts. But authentic and chosen and mine. As I moved through my day, answering emails, planning a surprise for when Lily returned from studying abroad, confirming dinner plans with friends for that evening, I thought about the journey that had brought me here. From the devastated woman standing in her kitchen surrounded by shattered glass, to the confident professional and whole person I was now. Richard had been right about one thing. That night had been a turning point. But not in the way either of us had imagined at the time. When he had walked out, claiming I was ruining his life, he had unknowingly set me free. Free to discover my strengths, my worth, my voice. Free to build a life defined by my own choices, rather than someone else's expectations. And when he had returned 2 weeks later, demanding half of everything, those documents I had shown him had represented more than just legal protections or financial security. They had been tangible proof that I was capable of protecting myself, of thinking strategically, of fighting for what was rightfully mine. Now, 3 years later, I no longer needed external validation of my worth. I carried that knowledge in the steady beat of my heart, in the confident set of my shoulders, in the clear gaze that greeted me in the mirror each morning. I was Catherine, and I was more than enough.